At its core, the immigration debate now, this year, is very similar to what it was in 2012. And in fact, these immigration politics that we've seen and kind of the politics surrounding issues of race and crime and those sorts of things more generally, it's been the very same politics for the last 50 years or so, where immigrants and others are kind of cast out and scapegoated as the real problem that people are confronting. And what we end up overlooking is kind of the real economics at the core of many of the problems that we face today. And so to that extent, it's very similar. You know, we can think back to 2012, for example, and the controversy surrounding Mitt Romney's 47% comments that were caught on tape, where he sort of accused half of the country of being dependent on government and unwilling to vote for him, et cetera. I mean, we can see some of that in 2012 and before and after regarding questions about the President Obama's citizenship status. You know, so we're seeing a lot of this again in 2016, but I think quite obviously a lot of it has been ratcheted up. You know, Donald Trump has really taken this approach where he's talking about building walls and banning Muslims and doing these really sort of extreme things that are a continuation of many of these politics, but he's kind of going places where many weren't willing to go before. I think a lot of folks are talking about just how extreme some of his propositions have been, but I think it's also important to recognize that he's also using some of these more subtle politics in his campaign as well. So, for example, things like "Make America Great Again" as his slogan, or you know, the tendency of people who are supporting him to say, "I like him because he tells it like it is." You know, these kinds of things seem innocuous, but there's something lurking below the surface there as well, right? And it's not based on fact, but it's based on fear and perception and those kinds of things. "Make America Great Again" sounds wonderful, but when exactly are you referring to, and how exactly are people taking that, right? Is it this understanding that people that changing demographics of the country, that increases in political power for people of color, that, you know, the rise of protest movements like Black Lives Matter, is it those things that are assumed to be making America not great? I've been studying the issue of immigration politics for a number of years, and I recently published a book titled "Undocumented Fears, Immigration and the Politics of Divide and Conquer" in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And the book explores the politics surrounding Hazleton's 2006 passage of the Illegal Immigration Relief Act, or IIRA. And what I found in Hazleton is that this really anti-immigrant law was passed on the basis of some widespread fears that were kind of really implanted by politicians who were seeking higher offices. Some widespread fears about undocumented immigrants committing crime, draining resources, that sort of thing, is what drove the passage of this law, and many people locally got on board with it. Potentially, you know, because the city was rapidly changing. Its demographics shifted quite a bit in a very short period of time. It was once almost entirely white and now is almost 50% Latino. And the city has been struggling economically, like many Rust Belt cities have been, because of demanufacturing, because many of the manufacturing jobs that people once relied on and were comfortable with started to leave. And so the argument that I make in Undocumented Fears is that this backlash against immigrants, the scapegoating, really became the dominant narrative locally, with horrible consequences for Latino folks on the ground. But it became the dominant narrative locally and diverted attention away from demanufacturing as a key problem, diverted attention away from the massive tax breaks that many of the meatpacking plants and warehouses and distribution centers that were coming in to take manufacturing's place, diverted attention away from many of those things, and you know how those things really hurt the local tax base and kept us from putting money towards schools and parks and all those kinds of things that a community needs. And so I think that this has implications for our national politics, because we're seeing something very similar here. We're seeing a political leader who is advocating scapegoating and really resonating with people who are kind of fearful of the existing circumstances. And people are rallying behind this because they're understandably fearful. But the problem is that it doesn't get at the complexities of the debate. It doesn't get at some of the core issues. I mean, it doesn't get at the facts, first of all, but it doesn't get at the core issues, like what are the economic roots of this? Why are racial justice activists out on the ground protesting? That's tied to a much larger history of racism and discrimination in this country that is real and ought to be appreciated. And so yeah, the local study really is kind of a microcosm for what we're seeing right about now in the presidential campaign.